Hello, everyone. We're very excited to be here with you to share some insights, benefits, and best practices about network tokens and lifecycle management of tokens. My name is Alexandra Lara, and I'm part of the payments team at Netflix, and I also have Santiago Guerra with me.
Thanks, Alexandra. Hi, everyone. My name is Santiago Guerra, and I'm the strategy planning and analytics lead for North America, supporting Alexandra and the rest of the payments team in everything analytics.
We really appreciate your questions and comments throughout the presentation, and so that we can have a super vivid and great conversation. So in today's session, we will share some aspects about payments at Netflix, the definition of network tokens, and why they're important to us. We will share some data on token performance, use cases for lifecycle management of tokens, and we will end with a summary of best practices for merchants and issuers. So let's talk about payments at Netflix. But first of all, you all know that Netflix is one of the world's leading entertainment service. With more than 220 million paid subscribers, we are in over 190 countries, and our mission is to entertain the world. So members can watch as much as they want, anytime, anywhere, on any internet-connected screen. From a payments perspective, we operate under a complex business model due to the fact that we're global and recurring in nature. We process in over 40 currencies with 25 plus processors around the world. And as we're truly committed to entertaining the world, the payments team is also committed to offering the best payment experience possible. Because we truly believe that payments should not be the reason for interrupting that entertainment, nor the user's inability to sign up. So we have continuously invested and experimented with new technologies in order to optimize our payments performance. And so we maximize our long-term revenue through a seamless payments experience. So Netflix was an early investor and adopter of network tokens. In fact, we started this process back in 2017, and we made the strategic bet in this new technology as we truly think that it enhances the security in the payments ecosystem. It fosters trust among the key players. Those are the merchants, the networks, and the issuers. And it ultimately supports an interrupted payment cycle, and thus maximizes retention, which is one of our main priorities for the team. Today, we will dig deeper into how tokenization has helped us at Netflix get closer in achieving that main goal, which is offering the best payment experience for our members. But let's talk about network tokens first and the definition of network tokens. So network tokens is a security technology that replaces a 16-digit primary account number, or better known as PAN. And that PAN is replaced with the token. Only the network tokens can be unlocked by, say, Visa and MasterCard, thus protecting the underlying account information and data and helping avoid fraud or abuse. Through lifecycle management, or LCM, issuers can automatically update the token when changes to the payment's credential happen. There is no need for the customer intervention, therefore reducing friction in the payments experience. But nevertheless, there's a big issue with tokens, and is that tokens do expire, or they can be deleted or suspended. And for those cases, lifecycle management is super important. It supports the continuity of the payment cycle without any interruptions. We'll discuss more about this later. So the topic of this presentation is network tokens with Visa and MasterCard. This is not to be confused with the tokens that are offered by some vendors. The topic of the presentation is related to tokens that are provisioned by Visa or MasterCard. So let's talk about how we process tokens. This can be summarized in 3 steps. The first step is to ask the network whether there's a token available for the PAN. And if there's one, then we can provision the token. That is why this step is called provisioning. This is not a financial transaction. We're just simply asking whether there's a token available, and if there's one, we'll get one back. The second step is related to requesting an authorization with the token and a cryptogram, which, by the way, is also provided by the networks. The banks associate the cryptogram with a unique merchant value, and this facilitates an extra layer of security and trust in the subsequent recurring transactions. We are in a subscription business, as I mentioned before. Therefore, it is important for us to secure that trust for the future. The third step is to use the token for subsequent transactions, as I mentioned before. And in our case, we no longer use that cryptogram. These steps are pretty much related to provisioning a token for the first time. There are some use cases in which we have to reprovision the token when the customer is not present. The steps are pretty much the same. However, we just need to reprovision a token. And this happens, for instance, when the token is deleted, or when it's a portfolio shift, or when we are tokenizing for the first time in a given market. But in reality, the steps are the same. If the token is deleted through LCM, for instance, we provision the token again and repeat the steps of provisioning the token, requesting an authorization with a cryptogram, and then using only the token for subsequent recurring transactions. It is important to remember and notice that in order for a token to be provisioned successfully, we need to have the payment credentials up to date. Therefore, account updater services are still very important if the merchant is provisioning tokens for merchant-initiated transactions. Okay, so I'm gonna check whether we have some questions so far.
I think we're good.
No questions. Good. So far we have discussed about tokenization and have briefly mentioned the concept of LCM. Next, Santiago will walk us through some examples of token performance with different issuers and introduce us to the importance of LCM proper practices. Santiago?
Thanks. Okay, so we saw what the token is and how we get it, but then what does performance actually look like? Here we have an example of two issuers in the US that both use network tokens. However, it's important to point out that using tokens doesn't immediately guarantee a better performance, but it can be achieved through correct implementation of tokens, best practices, and working together with merchants to identify gaps in performance. And so here in this graph, the red line represents token approval rate for recurring transactions, which, as Alexandra explained, it means that these transactions have already gone through the provisioning and the first crypto transaction, and they have an active token, so they've been used before with the cryptogram. The gray line indicates the PAN approval rate for comparable populations that we keep as a holdback to understand the differences in performance for comparable populations. So the issuer on the left has almost 2 percentage points better performance through tokens, while the issuer on the right has worse performance by using tokens. And so issuer B clearly still has a lot of opportunities to improve performance and capture the value of network tokens. And I guess also good to mention that obviously the improvement varies issuer by issuer depending on their portfolio, but issuer B could potentially be getting a 200 basis points superior performance by using network tokens compared to PAN correctly by leveraging best LCM practices. So let's take a look at some decline codes for each issuer to kind of understand what's behind this. Let's start with issuer A, which has a better token performance than through FPAN, meaning that the holdback population that has the active token. So we have this population that we could be processing through token, but we decide not to, so we can compare accordingly with the token population. Here, each bar represents the share of decline reasons for the token transaction in red and PAN in gray. Here we see that almost 80% of our declines are insufficient funds, which is what we would want most of our declines to be, with a small portion, of course, for account closed, because that's out of our control. In this case, there are almost no invalid account declines, which ideally should be zero, meaning that payment credentials are correctly being updated by the issuer. We still see some card expired declines in this case, and especially compared to ban. So this means that there's still opportunity for this issuer to improve on card expired LCM practices. So now let's take a look at issuer B. Issuer B has better performance through PAN, and the overall distribution of decline reasons indicates that there could be a much better implementation of LCM practices. For example, the first thing that we can notice here on the right is that card expired represents almost 30% of their declines, and most of this could be avoided, but form a significant part of the token population in the declines. It's almost zero through expired PAN. Perhaps some are hidden in do not honor, but the token could certainly go down to almost zero. Now let's look at invalid account number declines through token compared to PAN. These are very, very elevated, and this could indicate outdated payment credentials, or that we may be attempting tokens that are no longer valid and perhaps should have been deleted. However, it's important to note that it's not only the issuer's responsibility to act on to keep the token updated and send LCM practices, but it is also the merchant's responsibility to consume those updates and act accordingly. Like if there's a token delete notification, then the merchant is responsible for acting in that token delete, and then we'll see whatever the reason behind the delete, we could take different actions to move forward. And an example of an actual case that we worked in the past. For example, here we have an issuer making LCM improvements. This is a case of an issuer we've been working really close with. And we managed to identify that a good portion of the declines were happening on tokens with expired cards, because the proper date was not being updated correctly for the token, the latest date. And at the dotted line that we have here in the chart, the issuer started sending expiry date LCM updates, and immediately we can see the impact on the left on approval rate for the token renewal transactions, and on the right, immediately that red line of expiry date declines going to almost zero. This boosted performance by almost 100 basis points overnight. And I think it's a good example of how to work together, issuers, merchants, to identify and improve performance. And so what is the benefit for everyone in spending time optimizing all of these flows and performance for LCM? Let's take a look at the life cycle of our members. And so this is particular to Netflix, but I'm pretty sure it applies to many other merchants, particularly recurring merchants. We know acquiring members is extremely expensive for merchants and issuers. And so we aim for a seamless experience to keep them in our service for as long as they want, and not lose them because of a payments failure or interruption. No, and so every month your Netflix subscription is due. And while a big portion of transactions go through, there's a cohort of members that fail to pay. Of course, we don't want to lose your subscription due to a payments failure, so we try to recover you through different methods, and either through retries or because you decide to take action and update your payment credentials, which very often can be to a potentially different issuer. We end up recovering a big portion of these declines. However, for the issuer, the story is slightly different, because those that we recover because they updated their credentials to a different issuer obviously are a loss to the issuer, even though we as Netflix retain them. And so improving performance and retention helps, of course, the merchant retain their members, but also for the issuer, it's particularly more relevant because they also lose members who migrate to different issuers, and maintaining our recurring transactions with with a merchant such as Netflix or other recurring services could mean securing top of wallets with that person. And so let's take a look at how can we make sure that we capture the benefits of token through LCM to minimize both churn and switching to different issuers.
All right, so we could clearly see the benefits of LCM on the data that Santiago shared with us. And the conclusion is really that LCM truly enables the full potential of tokenization. Adopting tokenization alone is not enough. So LCM allows for an effective and secure flow of updates. And those are the updates that take place between issuers and merchants via the networks. Some examples of these LCM events include, and Santiago mentioned some before, but some of them includes, for instance, when changes to the payment credentials happen, the token has to be updated. Also, as Santiago mentioned, the card can expire, there's a new PAN issued, and so all of this information needs to be updated and be associated with the token to maintain the integrity of that token. Santiago also mentioned that tokens can be deleted or even suspended when, for instance, a merchant suffers a card compromise. And the idea is that only the merchant that suffered that card compromise is the one impacted or the one that has to take action related to the delete token, for instance. Tokens expire every 3 years with MasterCard, or in the case of Visa, the token expires based on the date of the PAN. And for this case, an LCM event is necessary to update the expired token. Another case of LCM is, for instance, when a customer of ours closes the account with Netflix, then we need to send a delete token status event. Or when, for instance, a bank account is closed. And so it is important that merchants or Netflix in this case, and issuers communicate with each other to maintain a clean payments ecosystem or flow. The other LCM event that I mentioned before are related to portfolio shifts. And for that cases, what we have seen is that a token delete is necessary for Netflix to reprovision the token and then have the token associated with the new BIN. So the issue with LCM is that there's no standardization in how each issuer integrates or adopts lifecycle management. And that is why we have seen some performance gaps among issuers. So some issuers perform really, really well on tokens, whereas others do not, unfortunately. So let's talk a little bit about the LCM flow and some of the best practices for LCM events. So in this flow, what we are discussing or what we are presenting is those LCM events associated with, say, changes in the payments credential or changes to the token. By way of example, say there's a new PAN, and so the issuer will send that update related to the new PAN to the network vault. The token is updated through an LCM event, and Netflix, for instance, will continue using the same token, but now that token is updated with the latest information or PAN, with the new PAN, and we will use that token without no issues for an authorization request. In this case, there's no need for the member's intervention, and therefore no interruption to their entertainment due to an LCM decline. In a PAN-only world, in some cases, account updater services will not take care of these cases, and unfortunately, the member is the one who has to go and share the new card with us, or we have just simply the member at risk, and it would be both. The risk has to be shared by the issuer and Netflix, and that's what we want to avoid. We just want to achieve a seamless payments experience. The other LCM events that are shown on this flow are related to status events. That is when tokens have to be deleted, suspended, or resumed. Netflix will consume the LCM event and take action, for instance, reprovision the deleted tokens, as we mentioned before. The next flow talks about situations in which the payments credentials have been compromised by a given merchant. So we have here merchant A, we have Netflix, and we have merchant C, all sharing the same cardholder and the same, payments credential, so to say. But each merchant will have a different network token. Merchant C is the one that suffered from the fraud event. And so for this case, the issuer will send a delete LCM status to the merchant C only, as this is the party that suffered the compromise event. Merchant A and Netflix will continue processing with the corresponding network token without any issues. Say the issuer reissued the card. Then merchant A and B, in this case Netflix, will continue using the same token that is updated with the LCM event and corresponds to or is linked to the new card that was issued. Again, all these changes do not require the member's intervention. And so we'll continue supporting an uninterrupted payments experience and entertainment. As we share with you, LCM is very critical to the success of tokenization and achievement of this seamless payment experience that Netflix is really working really hard to achieve. So let's recap what those best practices are first from a merchant perspective and then from an issuer perspective.
There are two questions that I think might be a good time to address before we jump into the best practice for merchants and issuers.
Let's do it.
The first one, just to clarify, it says if an expiry date changes, does that change the token number as well? It does not. The token will continue to be the same. It will just be linked to the most updated payment method with the most updated expiry date. The only reason a token number would change is if the token is deleted and there's a need for to reprovision a token, but otherwise the token will continue to be the same and just be kind of pointing to the most updated payments credential. That makes sense. The second one says, how can token be better performing than FPAN, and what means do not honor? I guess I can tackle the second part first. Do not honor is basically a decline category that it's kind of like a catch-all that provides no transparency, but it's basically decline codes that are used in a very generic way. And the idea, like the optimal decline definition would be, the best practices for decline would be to never have do not honor, because that just hides what the real reason for the decline is. And obviously there are reasons why issuers do this, but from a merchant perspective, I think it prevents us from providing the best feedback to issuers, and it also prevents us from understanding what is the root cause. So I guess from an analytics perspective, ideally issuers should minimize the use of do not honor, but it's a reality in the industry that do not honor is used a lot.
Yeah.
The other part of the question,
Sorry, if I may add to the do not honor question. It's so at Netflix and this is a very used practice across subscription businesses, in that we try to recover the member throughout the billing cycle. In other words, we are retrying failed transactions. The more granular, and speaking, about how we retry at Netflix, the more granular decline reasons we get, the more intelligent we become, thanks to our machine learning capabilities, as to what declines truly are recoverable. And I think for the issuers, this is important because every time we retry, there's a cost associated with it, not only for us, but also for the issuers. So to Santiago's point, the more transparency we can achieve in the payments ecosystem, then the better for everyone. So yeah, just wanted to add that.
And then the first part, how can tokens be better performing than FPAN? I hope this last couple charts explained it. Basically, tokens maintain that relationship with the cardholder regardless of what the status of their payment method is, as long as, of course, there is an existing valid payment method, regardless of has it been expired, has it been reissued, the token will still maintain that relationship until the account is closed or the token is deleted. So that makes the token perform better because we avoid all of these unnecessary declines that happen when a card is going through whatever update.
Yeah, another example is what is shown on this slide, and it's related to fraud events. And so we have, for instance, members that have been with us for a really long time. And unfortunately, if the card is of that high tenure member, as we call it, is compromised with another merchant, Netflix, or the cycle with Netflix, the payments experience with Netflix is interrupted until that member gets a new card. Account updater services, for that matter, won't help us. But tokens solve for this use case only if the issuer is putting in place the right LCM practices to allow uninterrupted payments for those merchants that were not involved in that fraud situation, but only the merchant that was.
Yeah. So hopefully that answered the questions, and happy to answer more as they come. But moving on.
Yeah, so we were going to talk about the best practices from a merchant perspective. Santi, do you want to take this one? Or the first one?
Yeah, so the best practice, I think, hopefully at this point should not be a surprise, is consuming LCM events. As merchants, it is super important to receive that expiration date update, which usually for the token it's pointing to the latest PAN, but also it can contain the latest data from the actual PAN. Also important to consume status events like token delete, suspended, or resume, and act accordingly. If, for example, there is a token delete, then the token should be deleted and not continue to retry it, because then it can get stuck in a useless cycle.
Yeah, the next one is merchants still have to consume account updates. As I mentioned before, having the up-to-date PAN information is necessary for a successful token provisioning. And this is especially important when you are starting from zero with tokenization or when portfolio shifts happen. We have been experimenting with tokenization in a new market, and we tested token provisioning for merchant initiated transactions. And the reason why we had to do that is because we had all the portfolio with PAN only. And when we started testing to provision tokens for those recurring transactions or those members that have been with us for the longest, we realized that the provision was failing just because we didn't have the most up-to-date payments credential or PAN. And so when we realized that, we had to work with some of the issuers to start sending account updates for us to be able to successfully provision the token.
Next one is more on an analytical side of things. It's super important to set a holdback so that you can compare the performance while getting to getting to a point where you can capture the benefit, because as we've seen, not every issuer, not every merchant has the same practices, and that's kind of the purpose of this presentation. So identifying what are the opportunities with different issuers is super important, and this can mostly be achieved through having comparable populations that are token eligible, that have tokens provisioned, but comparing the decline codes and working closely with issuers to identify what are the opportunities.
And lastly, from a merchant perspective, and actually from Netflix perspective, a higher adoption of tokenization and especially a proper use of LCM, both by the merchant community as well as the issuing community, will take us faster to a more optimal payments ecosystem. And at the end of the day, benefit our customers from a payments experience. At Netflix, we have been able to achieve great results thanks to the close collaboration with issuers and networks. And we encourage all the merchants to collaborate with tokens and in general with payments related challenges. But most importantly, in the tokenization world, what we should aim for is consistency among LCM practices. And I'd like to share another example with a bank in the US that we work closely with. We started seeing a significant degradation of approval rates through tokens. We worked really closely with the bank to understand the root cause of this underperformance. And as we investigated the issue, we identified that the root cause for this poor performance on tokens was a portfolio shift. We immediately discussed with the network and the bank what were some of the solutions, and we identified that a way to stop the underperformance was to delete the tokens. And so the issuer sent a delete status to those tokens. We consume it, we reprovision, and performance improved really as Santiago shared with the other use case overnight. The levels of approval rates improved by 250 to 300 basis points. So really good improvement. So now let's look at the best practices from an issuer perspective, although merchants and issuers are, of course, interrelated. And I think that the main message of this session is really to ensure a timely maintenance of LCM events. Issuers should ensure that they're pushing the plan updates and token status changes to the token vault from the networks, and so that merchants can also consume effectively all the updates and so achieve an effective payment cycle.
The other one, and I hope again this is obvious at this point, is make sure to monitor token declines. Things happen, things change very quickly in the payments ecosystem, and either it's because there was already something that existed or because there was a particular change. Understanding and optimizing around declines is super important, which is why I also brought up the point of do not honor. I think merchants can also be a great source of monitoring, and so to leverage merchants as well to monitor token declines, in particular invalid account number, account closed, and card expired, which are very, very specific and usually related to something token specific.
Santi, we have a question about what we mean by portfolio shift.
Mm-hmm.
I can take that one, or if you want.
You can take it. Fine.
Okay, so what specifically this bank was suffering was a change in the bin for a specific portfolio. And so that's what we say with portfolio shift, whether it is a change from a network. So say the cards were issued with Visa or MasterCard and to MasterCard, or also within the same brand, there's changes in the bins. Specifically to this bank, what I remember was that they acquired some bins from another bank, And these tokens were already provisioned, but they were not active. And so we will continue requesting an authorization with that old token. And the authorization through the token route was therefore failing. And so the only way for us to really get a token that was active was for us to get delete status and for us to reprovision the token so that the card, the most updated card, the true bean was associated with the token. Any other further questions about portfolio shifts? I hope I answered the question. Santi, anything you'd like to add?
I think basically, like you said, it can be either a bin goes from one brand to another, or it basically gets a bank gets acquired or part of their portfolio gets acquired, and then those tokens don't migrate accordingly. So there need to be reprovisions in those cases.
There's another edge case, and is the bins of a tokens have a range, and if an issuer issues more cards, right, then those new cards that are issued can go out or fall outside the bin range. That we heard from a specific bank. Perhaps is not a issue that is impacting a wide number of issuers, but that's another example where potentially there's issues with a token just because of the fact that the range that is associated with the bin for the token doesn't cover for all the cards that have been issued. All right, so next one is what I mentioned before. This is a super important aspect of LCM, and it's related to cases in which payment credentials have been compromised, and therefore the tokens have to be deleted or suspended. And so suspend is another status of the token. Usually what we have heard from the issuers is that this is, for instance, in cases when the new card is on transit, therefore they suspend the token. And so one important aspect that we haven't mentioned before is for the issuers to make sure that those suspended tokens are reactivated so that as soon as possible, so that the merchants can continue processing through that token without any interruptions.
And then finally, working closely with merchants, I think every time a merchant identifies an issue, it's likely that solving this issue will benefit the entire portfolio, which we've seen before, and issuers are super grateful whenever we can work together to find a problem. And again, this is another reason to improve decline transparency, because we can work together as merchants and issuers to solve, yes, probably with most of the focus on our members, but it's super likely that this issue is happening to other parts of the portfolio, to other merchants, and so together, working closely, we can overall improve the whole ecosystem.
Santi, we got another great question. Thank you so much for all the great questions. The question is, do you expect any impact with the new Visa token rules for web browsers or BNPL tokens? So in the case of Netflix, it does have an impact. We are a token requester. That means that we go to Visa and MasterCard and ask for the tokens, or we say, do you have a token for this ban, as I mentioned before. In the tokenization for the web browser, it is the web browser, the one that is requesting the token. And so Netflix is outside that token provisioning. And this is something that is concerning from our perspective, because we don't know how that token is going to perform. we're not sure how much transparency, visibility we have into how that token is performing, and if it is not performing, what are the root causes, and so it limits our ability to optimize payment performance. So yeah, there's some limitations that we have foreseen so far, but we're working closely with the networks to better understand what are the benefits and what are some of the limitations or implications for Netflix.
In addition, as Alexandra mentioned previously, account updater is quite important in case we ever need to reprovision a token. And with this web token, we would not have access to the plan, which means that we would not be able to reprovision a token if anything ever happens to it. So that's another challenge that we see here.
And I'm not familiar with the tokens for BNPL. Santiago, are you?
No, sorry, I'm not familiar with the acronym.
Anyone in the audience that is? Oh, I'm familiar with the. I think this is related to bill now, pay later, right? That's the acronym, but I'm not familiar with tokenization for those type of transactions. And so I'm not sure whether someone in the audience has some background. Perhaps what we can do is try to get some answers about that topic. All right. I think we got 2 more questions. I'm going to continue, and Santi, perhaps you can give me a hand. Oh, okay. So I think it's just that we have a few minutes left. So just to summarize, tokenization is definitely an effective tool to improve and sustain an optimal payments performance. But LCM is critical to really achieve the full potential and benefits of tokenization. So adopting tokenization alone is not enough. And all of us are together in this journey. So this is an invitation to continue collaborating and really achieve consistency in LCM practices, and definitely achieve adoption across the world. And so with that being said, thank you so much for your attention and time and the great questions. Please reach out to Santiago or me if you have any further questions or feedback.